It is an April night, and outside the window, radiant spring blossoms are drifting through the air. Welcome to Slow Night Ancient Tales. Tonight, leaving this warm spring evening behind, we are going to travel back in time into the biting winter of 1935. The story, painted by the prose of novelist Kim Yu-jeong, is titled Rice Cakes. From the comfort of your cozy blankets, come and meet 7-year-old Oki in a snow-covered mountain village far away. The sorrowful scenery of an era where even hunger became a form of entertainment begins now. Now please close your eyes, relax, and step into this cold yet fierce winter tale from 90 years ago. Rice Cakes. Author, Jong Issue, 1935. Originally, people eat rice cakes. This is a story of how rice cakes ate a person. In other words, it is a tale of a human being devoured by rice cakes. It might sound like nonsense, but that person is such an absurd existence that it cannot be helped. I'm talking about Oki, a mere 7-year-old girl who, despite the arrival of winter, hasn't managed to get a single quilted cotton garment and is shivering in a thin, double-layered jacket. Whether this should be counted as a complete human being or not, I do not know, nor is it my concern. At any rate, her father is Tteok, the poorest man in the village, said to be as lazy as a bear. It is almost amusing how he dawdles, even when bitter cold and starvation strike. He is such a carefree soul, a Sin-Chong-bu who doesn't blink an eye, that we find enough interest to tease his face, which is always encrusted with sleep in the corners of his eyes. Hey there! How do you plan to get through this winter? You'll surely starve to death this year. When I say this, my friend replies, "What are you talking about? Who do you think I am? I may not have a patch of field to till now, but back in the day I was..." He jumps up and stares vacantly at the distant mountains as if tasting again the happiness of the days when he was a tenant farmer who could have sold land. But then, piqued by the contempt, he flushes and asks, "Are you lot any better?" before slumping into the grass and drawling out an Arirang folk song. So, in my mind, I have no choice but to think of him as a human being as well. To be honest, seeing how they live at home, one cannot fathom what joy they find in life. Even that house isn't his. It belongs to Gaedong's family. Originally, they had few family members, and since the house sat isolated at the foot of the mountain, they rented out the across room, thinking it might make the place feel less lonely. Of course, at that time, Tteok was desperately visiting them, begging for a room as he had nowhere else to go. There was no particular rent, only the requirement that he help out with busy farm work when needed. Tteok was overjoyed, thinking it a lucky break. However, a person does not live by a room alone. The across room of this house is exceptionally squashed, with dingy, leaning old walls that make it feel like a cave. If you peek in during winter, it is quite a sight. In the upper part of the room, Oki sits huddled under rags, whined with hunger, while in the lower part, his wife, seething with rage, lies curled up facing the wall as if she knows nothing of the world. The man takes his place between his wife and daughter, rolling his eyes blankly at the ceiling. The sight is so pitiful it makes the onlooker feel ashamed. Perhaps there are more days spent like this than days spent eating. Despite this, his usual greeting is a request for a drink, as he is a great lover of alcohol. Even last spring, he was so desperate for a drink that he carried the manure he had collected at home and traded it for liquor. It was the first time in the village anyone had heard of trading manure for booze, and the women gossiped about it everywhere. Yet the man remains oblivious to this. Once the alcohol is in him, the world becomes his. He makes a strange sound, whether from his nose or mouth, and pesters everyone he meets with nagging talk. On the other hand, alcohol also seems to bring him worry. When drunk, he often frets over household concerns he never thought of before. Once when I met him, he was thoroughly intoxicated. After babbling on about his household affairs, he finally said, "I wish that girl would just die. She whines when she eats. She whines when she doesn't eat. The whole situation is just miserable." He lamented as if the circumstances were dire, adding that having one young daughter was a great burden. Hearing this, I asked in exasperation, "Aren't you thinking of getting a son-in-law later to put him to work?" He shook his head violently, saying, "Oh, when would that be? I have to feed and raise her until then," looking as if he had no appetite for the idea at all. Whether he truly finds his own flesh and blood that resentful is hard to say for certain. Likely, no father truly hates the child he sired, yet it is also a fact that he often comes home and strikes her cruelly, telling her to die. But when her crying becomes truly unbearable, he picks up a knife and says, "Go on, cry, you wench, I'll kill you," which instantly wipes the tears away. The snow piled up deep, and thanks to that, the price of wood soared. Everyone in the village raced to carry loads of wood into the town. They walked 20 li on mountain paths where the snow reached their shins. In this rush, Tteok struck luck and managed to get some grain, millet at least, and consequently, the squabbles with his daughter decreased significantly. Even in his sleep, he miraculously senses the arrival of dawn. He wakes as soon as it gets light and pulls at his wife's skirt as she lies beside him. Thus begins Tteok's so-called dry wash. He spreads the skirt with both hands, fumbling to remove the sleep from his eyes, and then rubs his face vigorously. Next comes the porridge. He gulps down a bowl quickly and heads out with his A-frame carrier. Of course, while the husband drinks his porridge, the wife must go outside and prepare the load of wood. She helps him with the carrier and, shivering, loads the dry brushwood. As she ties the load tightly for her departing husband, she calls out distant warnings several times. "Don't just spend it on drink, buy some grain," then returns to the room. It is exactly at this time that Oki usually wakes. She rubs her eyes and rushes straight to her mother. In truth, had she been sleeping all this time? No, she had woken long before. She clearly heard the clatter of her father's spoon and the crunching sound of him chewing pickled vegetables. Not only that, she clearly saw her father's bowl of porridge moving back and forth within her closed eyes. The hunger surged up so suddenly that she even twitched her hips, wanting to get up immediately. Meanwhile, saliva seeped in, filling her mouth. But if she dared to get up, there would be her father's fists. "You brat, what do you know that you're up already and whining?" Then that fist, that huge fist. She had to swallow her saliva secretly, keep her twitching body pressed firmly to the floor, and pretend to snore. The mother, unlike the father, dotes on her. Only after confirming that the father had surely left with the wood would Oki get up, rush to her mother's side, and devour that porridge. But that day, she woke exceptionally early, unlike any other time. To use Tteok's words, the wretched girl was acting up from dawn as if determined to cause trouble. In truth, it wasn't a tantrum, but extreme hunger. She had swallowed her saliva over and over while listening to her father's spooning, but eventually she could endure it no longer. Yet, sitting up abruptly meant facing the terrifying fist and feeling embarrassed. With her eyes closed, she pondered this and that. Why did she have to wake up exactly when her father was eating porridge? Her hollow stomach couldn't tell if the coldness of the floor was piercing it or making it go numb. Her father finished one bowl and seemed to be having more. The sound of porridge being poured, jururuk, tuk-tuk, rang out. At that moment, she snapped to her senses. She summoned her courage. She reached her right arm back and scratched incessantly as if bitten by something. Suddenly, she let out a cry, "Unga!" She sat up groggily and cried, rubbing her eyes with the backs of her hands. Her father flared up in anger. He slapped the back of her head and grumbled dissatisfactorily, "She won't even die. She just causes trouble." He told the mother, "Don't feed her anything today. Let her starve all day." Whether she eared him or not, the mother kept her eyes down and remained silent. She seemed too afraid of the father to say anything. He slapped her because she cried, and then slapped her again. Every time, little Oki fell sideways like a roly-poly toy, only to rise and cry again. He wouldn't give her porridge, only beatings. "You cursed brat, eat it all yourself and just die, you plague-ridden wretch." Such harsh curses almost reached the tip of her tongue. But seeing those glaring eyes, she didn't dare look at his face. She could only hold her forehead with both hands and wail loudly. No matter how much she cried, it was useless. Only after the load of wood had left for town did her crying finally pay off. Her mother brought in a bowl of watery porridge. Oki pounced on it immediately. Wiping the tears from her eyes with her left sleeve, she shoveled it in continuously. The millet porridge was mostly thin liquid, so not much stayed on the spoon. It was almost easier to just lift the bowl and drink it. Her spoon worked tirelessly. For every spoonful the mother took, Oki took 2 or 3. Even then, fearing she might lose out, she frequently glanced at her mother's mouth as she sucked the spoon. Halfway through, the mother quietly put down her spoon. She tucked her hands under her legs and sat silently, looking down at her daughter. Oki finished the whole bowl, but she was still hungry. She began pestering her mother, poking her in the waist. For a child this small, there is no greater interest than eating and babbling, and she has no other developed talents. For a child like Oki, who stays sullenly by herself and doesn't try to play or talk with friends, the instinct for eating has become vastly overdeveloped, eventually becoming her sole form of entertainment. Moreover, there was that belly that was always hollow. One bowl of porridge should have been enough, but she didn't know that. She only had a vague consciousness that she must always be hungry. The incident began here. She cried persistently for over 2 hours, but her mother gave no answer. She merely groaned, "Oh, my stomach," falling over and moaning in pain. She suffered from such cold illness from time to time. Realizing there was no hope, Oki got up and opened the door. The snow was piled high and dazzling. Snowflakes swirled into the entryway with a wing-wing sound. Shivering, she went down to the yard. A pot hung at the base of the north wall. The lid opened. Sure enough, as her mother said, there was no porridge, only a tear and eat your mother situation. However, her eyes caught 2 stalks of dried radish greens, frozen to the bottom of the pot. She scraped them off with her fingernails, put them in her mouth, and chewed. There was no taste other than the jegyok of chewing ice. As she closed the pot and straightened her back, a peculiar thought occurred to her. Oki looked around in all directions, then stepped up to the entryway and pressed her eye to a hole in the door of Gaedong's room. This is exactly why Gaedong's mother hates Oki like a thorn in her side. Whether it's true or false, I don't know the details, but she says, "Whenever my family is away, that girl sneaks in day or night and takes away all our household goods." When she spewed insults, calling her a fox, a cupboard rat, a thief, I could immediately see how much she loathed Oki. However, the talk of taking household goods is likely a blatant lie, but the fact that she saw the girl through a gap in the wall while using the outhouse, sneaking out of the room with a raw potato hidden in each hand under her jacket, is true. How angry and urgent she must have been to run out without even finishing her business. She wanted to scream and scold her, but she felt sorry for Oki's mother groaning in the room, so she just glared intensely. The girl's face turned red instantly, and a moment later, she threw the 2 potatoes down at her own feet and walked away with her hands behind her back in a precocious manner. But this has nothing to do with my story. It is enough to state the reason why Oki entered Gaedong's room. I said earlier that this house belonged to Gaedong's family, but that is not strictly true. In reality, it belongs to the scholar's house across the stream, and Gaedong's mother was, so to speak, a hereditary servant of that household. Thanks to living in their house, tilling their land, and living under their influence, Gaedong's mother often went to the master's house to do laundry, iron clothes, or handle food during big events, frequently bringing back delicious food. Knowing that today was the master's birthday, Oki had come in to rummage for food, and when she found none, she tried to take the potatoes. Gaedong's mother's guess was not wrong at all. If there was food to be had in the village, it would be difficult to find anyone who knew about it faster than Oki. However, to say that Oki followed Gaedong's mother around with the sly hope that she might be given some rice or cakes is an understatement. When Oki followed Gaedong's mother with her hands tucked behind her back, she had no plan. Going into her own room only met her mother's irritability from being sick, and standing outside the brushwood gate was cold and shivering. She had nowhere to go for an outing. So she stood shivering blankly until she saw Gaedong's mother heading toward the stream path, and she simply followed, thinking that was the way to go. If she had any thought then, it was a mixture of hatred and desperate longing for her father, wishing the wretch would return quickly so they could cook porridge. As evidence, Oki lost sight of Gaedong's mother at the gateway of the scholar's house and stood there alone. Now, having nowhere to go, she hesitated again. But she made her decision in that instant. Oki boldly entered the middle gate. A new hope, Or perhaps she just wanted to watch the mouths that were smacking over delicious food. Looking this way and that, she hesitantly headed for the kitchen. Her attitude was as if she had come with an urgent message for Gaedong's mother. In the kitchen, just about every woman in the village had gathered. Some were soaking rice in beef soup, others were chewing glutinous rice cakes. While someone over here was tearing at dried pollock, someone over there was eating scorched rice alone while hitting a complaining child with a fist. When Oki's head popped into the kitchen doorway, they each threw an insult. "Look at that fox girl. Has the rice bag arrived? She certainly has a nose for smells." Then they cackled for no reason. Oki's family are neither servants nor tenants of this house. Naturally, she had no right to a place in this feast of fine food. But regardless of the insults, Oki stood in a corner, silent and listless. She swallowed her saliva looking at one thing, then swallowed again looking at another. Just then, the young lady of the house came down. She greeted Oki warmly and scolded the women for eating by themselves. When she pointed to Oki and told Gaedong's mother, "She can eat as much as you give her," the only response was a smirking grin. The young lady laughed as well. She was a beautiful girl of 13 or 14, wearing a yellow jacket and a blue skirt. She opened the pot lid herself, scooped soup into a large bowl, mixed in white rice, and even stuck a spoon in it. Oki snatched it up hurriedly. White rice, white rice. The portion was enough to fill a grown man. If we were to measure the time it took Oki to put that into her stomach, it was no more than 7 or 8 minutes. The taste of the beef broth was sweet. The praise from the side, "She eats so well," was also sweet to her ears. Thrilled on both counts, she shoveled it in without looking aside. The women cackled and whispered, but when they looked back with wide eyes, they saw Oki, who had finished the whole bowl and was now slumped back, sitting hunched over from her full belly. Her black jacket's skirt was pierced with holes where it had been scorched. Even then, it was too narrow, leaving her buttocks fully exposed. Her hair was scattered over her shoulders like a thorn bush. In this state, she sat shivering and panting from the fullness. Yet, as if she were still hungry inside, she was scraping the bottom of the bowl. The young lady smiled and led her by the hand onto the wooden veranda. Because it was very cold, no one was there. She went to the cupboard and brought out a piece of red bean steamed cake the size of a palm. Oki took it and gulped it down. Immediately after, another piece followed. But this time, Oki did not even reach out her hand, refusing wordlessly. This was because her stomach had stretched to its maximum, the skin as tight as a blown-up football. It had expanded so much in front that it spread to her sides. She could hardly move and panted with her shoulders rising. The food must have been packed right up to her throat. Here, there is something strange. More rice cake appeared, but this was not red bean cake. It was baksolgi, white steamed cake, with chestnuts and dates sticking out here and there. It looked as if it would melt in the mouth with one bite. When asked, "Don't you want this too?" Oki quickly reached out her hand to indicate she did. How on earth did she eat it? That lump of cake as big as a rice bowl. Of course, she began eating bravely. At first, she ate quickly. In the middle, she ate slowly. Eventually, she couldn't finish it, gave half back to the young lady, and turned her head aside. That Oki ate baksolgi on top of that belly was a miracle, and that she left some behind was also a miracle. To be fair, she couldn't eat more because the cake was pushing right up to her throat. If anything more could be put in, it would only be what remained in her mouth. Then how did she eat the 2 honey-coated dtteok, fried honey cakes that came next? It is something difficult to judge by common sense. At any rate, when the dtteok appeared with the question, "How about these?" Oki accepted them without hesitation. She picked one up with her fingertips, sucked the honey from it, and put it in her mouth. She chewed the honeyed cake for a while and tried to swallow it. Her chest stung, and the cake immediately came back up. She chewed again. Leaning her head and shoulders forward, straining with all her might, she tried to swallow again. This does not seem like the action of a normal human being. But one must note the illusion of a starving intestine that has always been hollow. Whether the belly was full or empty was not the issue then. A sheer, gluttonous greed to keep eating acted unconsciously within Oki, and she only knew what she wanted to eat. Added to that, was the delicious taste of the cake. It was a desperate effort to enjoy a flavor she had never tasted in her life. If the order of the cakes had been Tteok first, then baekseolgi, then red bean cake, Oki might have been satisfied with the Tteok alone. She certainly would not have eaten the others. You didn't even see it, so how do you know someone else's business so well? Then let us have Gaedong's mother, who witnessed the scene, explain. Oh, truly, that girl ate like a beast. She finished that whole bowl and then ate rice cakes too. That's a stomach for you. When she was eating the Tteok, I thought she was going to die right then. Without a drop of water, she chewed it thoroughly and swallowed it. Her eyes turned inside out as she gulped it down. Is that even a human? My heart shrank to the size of a bean. I thought for sure she would die. Seeing her standing there shivering in the cold, it was so uncanny it made my skin crawl. Hearing this, I reproached her, asking why she didn't stop the girl. She flared up, saying that while she might have fed her on purpose, how could she stop someone eating out of hunger? But this is a flat-out lie. Like the other women, she undoubtedly stood at the edge of the veranda, praising her and cackling "gee" as the girl ate. Oki's ordeal has remained a topic of gossip in the village ever since. When they have nothing to do, the women gather and chatter about that day, and it seems quite strange to them that Oki, who rightfully should have died, somehow survived. Indeed, for 3 or 4 days, she couldn't eat and suffered so much from a high fever that she nearly lost her soul. However, from the beginning, the only one whose heart was truly squeezed was Oki's mother. She had been lying down sick, but when she saw Oki coming into the room, she jumped up. When she asked why the belly was in that state, Oki gave no answer and just lay down on the floor. She lay flat so as not to touch her stomach, but she let out a scream of, "Oh, my belly!" so loud it could burst the ceiling. She rolled this way and that on the cold floor in a frenzy. But after vomiting up what she had eaten all over her cheeks, she eventually fainted. Her face turned pale and her limbs went limp. In that moment, as her mother described it, her eyes went dark as if the heavens were collapsing. She held her daughter and wailed, "Oh my goodness, what do I do? What do I do?" After shouting several times and finding no one coming to help, she rushed out in a panic. She thought there was no other way but to call a fortune teller to recite sutras to cure a sudden illness. Of course, the drum beating and sutra reciting began in broad daylight. The fortune teller explained that if everyone who overate ended up like this, no one would be left alive. His interpretation was that this was not a sickness from food, but rather a haunting. A child's ghost that usually followed her had finally possessed her. If that is so, I think the ghost might have possessed Oki when she was coming out of the Scholar's Gateway. Why? Because as Oki was walking down the slope in front of the gate, she slipped on the snow and lay there for a long time without moving. She had lost that much control over her body. She got up, shook off the snow, and tried to walk. Her legs felt like 1,000 pounds. Once she stepped down, it wasn't easy to lift them again. Her eyelids were stiff, and she kept letting out hollow yawns. Shivering and panting with her shoulders, she walked through the snow with great care. If she slipped even a little, her belly would burst. Or rather than the fear of it bursting, she couldn't afford to slip because her belly hurt so much. Indeed, Oki's belly was exactly as the village women said, the painful belly of a woman in her full term of pregnancy. As she came down the stream path and saw the well, she felt a sudden, intense thirst. She leaned over and gulped down a ladle of water. Her teeth and throat stung for a moment, but the water immediately came back up. Not only that, but following the water, the rice cakes came pouring out. Because they were swallowed in a rush without being chewed well, they came out in undigested lumps. In an instant, a heap of rice cake lay on the ice in front of the well. Oki collapsed weakly onto the snow once more. When I think about how this child managed to get back to her house, it was no small effort. It must be called a grand adventure. It was much later when I visited Oki's house. The sunset wind was cold and shivering, but I was curious because the rumors about Oki were grim. When I hurriedly opened the door, the mother was still sitting by her daughter's head, rubbing her eyes on her knees and sobbing. Whether her cold illness had vanished, the face that was always yellow with distress was now flushed with tears. The man sat huddled and didn't even greet me. He sat with his arms crossed, staring through the opposite wall as if he had made some firm resolution, showing a strange air of dignity. Seeing that he had come home early today, he must have sold his wood well. After a while, he turned his head and asked, "Hey, will she really not die?" Bongu blinked and gave a half-hearted answer. "Why would she die? I read the sutras for war half a day," though he didn't seem entirely certain. He had read the sutras, but since there was no effect, he seemed suspicious himself. This fellow Bongu is a born scoundrel. No one can match his knack for women, gambling, and sudden impulses. And as for talent, there is almost nothing he cannot do. From farming to gambling, acupuncture, fortune-telling, carpentry, even thievery. When he reads sutras with his eyes closed, he looks like a real blind priest. But when he draws a card, his eyes are as sharp as an owl's. Yet, for some reason, whenever there is a sickness or trouble in the village, it has become a habit to call this fellow. If a guy like this can tell fortunes, then I could pull a dragon's horn. When Tteok squinted and asked if they should try feeding her more salt, I didn't answer him. Instead, I turned red and yelled at Bongu, "What kind of sutras are you talking about? Just do your job and set her right." Because now was not the time for sutras or salt. The child was laid out under a quilt, her face deathly pale, shivering every now and then with her eyes closed. From her mouth, rice grains and foam were still gulping back and forth. Her hands were cold, and the color had left her skin. At my urging, Bongu took a small bamboo case from his pocket. He pulled out a rusted needle, licked it once, and rubbed it against his ragged collar. After letting go of the right hand and pressing the needle in with his left thumb, Oki finally seemed to regain consciousness. "Ugh!" she screamed, startled. At the same time, she let out a loud pudeo-duck and soiled the quilt. Tteok watched this, frowned, and showered her with curses. "You wretched girl, what on earth did you eat to act like this?" But I saw right through him. If he had been the one eating and ended up like this, he wouldn't have been so angry. He was intensely resentful that his daughter had gorged herself on such precious food without thinking of bringing even a piece to her father. "That girl, why on earth did she eat so much rice cake until her belly burst?" he muttered, his face twisted with clear envy and hatred. In truth, in such a situation, he would have done exactly as Oki did. No, I thought that even if he had finished all the honey dwok and was offered rice wine, he would have snapped it up even if he had to spit it back out. I looked at his face once more. The image of Oki stuffing herself with rice cakes, as if unsure whether it was a dream or reality, lingers before my eyes. Perhaps even that pain of her belly feeling like it would burst was the most satiated memory of her life. The biting winter wind in the novel is now subsiding, and it is time to return to the warm spring night where we remain. Unlike Oki's grueling day, I hope your night is cozy, abundant, and free of any worries. May you fall into a light sleep as if cherry blossom petals are settling by your bedside. This has been Slow Night, Ancient Tales. A spring day brighter than today awaits you tomorrow. Good night.